All right, so welcome to our masterclass. My name is Mike Benham. I'm with Govbidpro. Govbidpro.com is our website. What we're going to talk about today in our masterclass, and we'll have the Q&A session at the end. Thank you for those of you that have joined us. Is we're going to talk about the top 10 factors of looking at a government bid. And what we're talking about specifically is we're talking about the SAM.gov bids. If you go to SAM.gov, those are the bids for the federal government. Pretty much the same factors with the SLED, state and local education, but we're talking about the bids that are organized on SAM.gov. I'm going to use these Post-its, these big yellow Post-its from Staples to get that started. So when you go to SAM.gov, you go into advanced search, and then you'll go into, obviously you want to look at a future due date. So that's how the government works, is they're putting out these requests for quote and requests for proposal. There are some RFIs out there, but the number one thing that we're looking at is obviously a future due date. Now, it depends on how quickly you think you can reply to an RFQ or RFP. If you think you can reply to an RFQ, say today's Friday, by Monday, and you want to work over the weekend, then you're looking at a due date of Monday. I believe it's August 5th. So you're looking at a future due date. I've got a client that's in, for example, software development. They need at least 2 weeks to look at a bid and put the proposal together. And so that's their future due date, is they're looking at already, today's August 2nd, they're looking at a August 16th or after. Normally, the future due dates are about 2 to 3 weeks out. If it's past that, then, then it just kind of shows the government's not serious. Those are more the RFIs, the request for information. But you're looking at, most of the time when you're on SAM.gov, the bids are going to be about 2 to 3 weeks out, maybe a month out. And the bigger it is, the more the further out it is. Now, there is a website out there called GovWin. Besides SAM.gov, this is a private company that I use just to give you the resource. They have the bids that are pre-solicitation that say, hey, it's August, the government's looking at, let's say, a cybersecurity project, and this is a pre-solicitation. The RFP will come out in March, most likely. Okay, so that's GovWin. So a lot of the bigger companies can plan ahead and say, hey, we've got a RFP that's coming out in March for cybersecurity, and they know about the information now, so they can create a calendar. So that's kind of an extension of the future due dates. All right, let's move on to the second piece. The second thing that you're going to look at in the under general description in the bid in SAM.gov is I actually combined it. Obviously, it's the NICS code and the set aside. Those are together in the same section. NICS code, NAICS code, stands for North America Industry Code Standard. North America Industry Code Standard. Everything that's bought and sold by the government has this 6-digit number. Okay. For example, recruiting, human resources, 561420, I believe, that kind of thing. Janitorial service, IT, and we mentioned cybersecurity, medical device. Each one has a NICS code. Everything to beauty supplies. I've got a client that's in lotions and shampoos and that kind of thing. The other piece here is set asides. The government's going to say this is set aside for small business, woman-owned, veteran-owned, service-disabled veteran-owned, 8A, and you would get those certifications at SBA.gov. So not only do you have to go to SAM.gov to get a CAGE code, CAGE, let's put that over here. That stands for Commercial and Government Entity. That just means that you are an American company, you're in the United States, you're not in North Korea, you're not in China, you're not in Russia, or Iran, depends how you say it, and you're not in those hostile environments, and you have an address here in the United States, and you also have no back taxes, and you paid your child support if you have that. And so that's when you get a cage code, and we've got somebody looking to join us here. Bear with me 1 second. Oh, here we go. And Ray's going to join us. Ray, thanks for coming.
Hello.
All right. We just got started a few minutes ago. We talked about future due date. We're talking about the top 10 things to look at with the bids. Number 1 was due date. Number 2 is the NICS code and the set aside. We talked about getting a cage code on sam.gov. All right.
But how are you?
Good. Thank you. My volume's all the way up, so check your volume on your end, and if you could mute, we're actually recording this, so you'll get the YouTube link later. Okay. This is important. Number 3. Okay. Number 3 is the decision criteria. What do I mean by that? That means, how is the government going to decide the winner of this bid? So the government's putting out an RFQ or RFP for this product for, let's say, 3D printers. But they also want 4 line items. They want the printers, they want the installation, they want the training, and they want the warranty. 4 line items. What's the decision criteria? Then the government's going to say, we're going to go by LPTA. This is one of the decision criterias. LPTA, lowest price technically acceptable. We've got a bunch of acronyms here. Okay, lowest price technically acceptable. Or the government might say, they'll state it just like this. They'll say, the government will choose the best value for the government. What does that mean? Your guess is as good as mine. No, what that means is the government's saying, we're going to take a look at the best value. If you need to build this bridge, we want 10 years or 20 years experience. So that's in terms of the best value for the government. Okay? Those are a couple of the decision criteria that they have. All right, let's move on to this one. I like this one right here. Number 4, we're at the bottom of this yellow page here, and that is pricing. And I don't mean in terms of lowest price. And by the way, if you sell hardware to the government, it's got to be brand new. Okay, new product. The government will say, in terms of pricing, number 4, the vendor shall hold the price for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. That's a telltale sign too. So that's going to be a criteria as well as one of the things to look at. Say, okay, let's say you're a reseller of laptops or desktops, or you're a reseller of medical device. And the government says, look, you need to hold the price for 90 days. Everybody here knows that sometimes the prices change. They change weekly, they change daily. So you got to look out for that, the pricing. Okay, so that's the pricing hold for the government. And by the way, the SLED, state, local education, airports, school districts, police, your municipalities, state universities, they're infamous for holding, they say, hey, you got to hold the price for 60 days. Why is that? The school districts buy and they do their procurement over the summer, and then they lock you into a 1-year contract. So they want to be locked in, and they give you a minimum. Say, hey, we're going to buy 500, minimum 500 of these printers over the next year of the school year that starts from August and goes all the way to May. But they'll put you under contract at that said price, and they'll put you under that contract before August. So that's just some of the things that we want to share here. All right, I'm going to move on to number 5 here. This one's simple. Let's see if this thing can operate. There we go. All right. Number 5 is government won't pay for information. Doesn't matter if it's a capability statement or if it's a quote or anything like that, or it's a flyer or it's a brochure. They're saying, we're not paying for that. They actually have to state that, believe it or not. I mean, everybody here is a small business owner. When you have a prospect, you know they're not going to pay for that brochure or your business card or your capability statement or your proposal, but the government actually has to state that. So just a couple things to look for. All right, number 6, this is a cool one. I like this one. All right, this one, there's no pun intended, but there's some questions on this one because it is the Q&A. So the government will state that there's a Q&A session. Let's walk through that. So let's say the government says, this bid is due August 9th, and today's August 2nd. So there's a week in between. Here's the thing, the government doesn't want a million emails and a million phone calls and a whole bunch of questions about, you know, all these different things. Maybe it's a surveillance camera installation and, you know, do you want the wiring outside or inside? I mean, all these questions that people have, right? Or will you take brand name or equal if you're selling product? Let's say back to our 3D printers. You know, will you take Dell or do you want HP, or is it brand name or equal? It goes by specification. So people have questions. So what the government will do is say, hey, we know you have questions. The questions are due Monday, August 5th by close of business at, say, 4 o'clock Eastern. That's a 4. Again, this is hypothetical, but I just want to walk you through this as an example. 4 p.m. Eastern on Monday the 5th, your questions are due. You cannot ask a question after 4 p.m. on the 5th. Okay, now the answers will be provided by close of business, let's say 5 p.m. on the 6th, which is Tuesday, and the bid is still due the 9th. Now, what the thing is, and this goes into another factor, is the government may actually move the due date. If they've got so many questions, they might actually move the due date. This relates to modification. We'll get to that later. But in terms of Q&A, the government knows that there's going to be questions, so they answer them, and then they'll say, it's due by, your questions are due by a certain date. We're going to give you the answers. Those will be as a PDF on the sam.gov link, and then they'll have an amendment that you have to sign, you guessed it, with all the questions and answers on there. So they're saying, hey, you looked at it, you signed it, you may have been one of the ones that asked the question. This is an amendment. What it is just, this is their way of due diligence to say, hey, you knew about the Q&A. If you win the contract, we don't have to go back. You sign the amendment. So you have to sign the amendment and send the amendment with your proposal as a PDF. Normally, the bids, by the way, are sent by 99% of the time. It's email sent as an attachment. Okay, let's move on to number 7. This one's important because it's money related. The bids in bold will have, it'll say currently this solicitation is unfunded, or it'll say it is funded. If it doesn't say anything, that means it's funded. If it'll say currently this is unfunded. So that's important. So does that mean there's going to be a contract? Maybe. If it's funded, most likely. So it's a quote for, let's say, cell phones, and they want 1,000 cell phones, and it says it's unfunded. That means they're looking for a quote, but it's not part of the budget. It's not part of the budget. Maybe it's part of next year's budget, which, by the way, starts October 1st, and we're sitting in today's August 2nd. So if it's unfunded, there's a need, there's a requirement, but it's not part of the budget. Okay, so you got to look out for that. That'll be most likely in bold some of the time. Number 8. Number 8 is multi-year contract. Okay, what does that mean? What you want to do is you want to look to see if it's a multi-year contract. It's not just a purchase order, which is what we call here at Govbidpro close-ended. Okay, why is it close-ended? Time for a new marker. There we go. Because what that means is you get a purchase order for bottled water, and that's it. You deliver, you're done. You invoice, you get paid, you're done. If it's a contract, it's a multi-year contract to do HR recruiting, okay? So you've got the first year. What you want to look out for is that the government will say in there, the government reserves the right to extend to year 2. And same thing in year 2, the government reserves the right to extend to year 3. That just gives them the out. That gives them the out to say, hey, you know, you're not doing, we're not happy with it. We want a different supplier. So at the end of year 2, they're going to put it back out to bid. You see that all the time. Okay. So that's the multi-year contract. You got to look out for that. Number 9, this is getting down to the end here. Cancellations, mod for modifications, and change of due date. Change of due date. All right, let's talk about this. The government reserves the right to cancel these bids at any time. Anytime. They can just cancel and say, we're not doing it. So that's part of the risk mitigation. So the answer to that is we do a lot of bids. We do a volume bid. Second, modification. They can modify, the government can modify these bids and say, we're going to change the quantity from four 3D printers to 6. They can do that. Of course, you can say, hey, the price has changed because it's a higher quantity. Or maybe the price hasn't. Third, they could change the due date. They do this all the time. We had a bid that was due this morning. They changed it last night, and it's due now in 2 weeks. They just move stuff around. You know, it depends on requirement. They know if they move the due date forward, they're not going to get the bids until 2 weeks from now because they moved the due date to 2 weeks from now. And then they're not going to issue the purchase order. And then after that, they're not going to get the product as quick. So they know ahead of time, the government knows ahead of time, if you move the due date, you're not going to get the product by October. You're going to get it in September. Now it's October. Okay. But you got to look out for that, is cancellations, modifications, and change of due date for these bids. Last one, number 10, is the government is, excuse my expression here, but covering their seat, if you will, and they are saying the government, this solicitation, let me back up, the solicitation does not constitute a purchase order and or contract. In other words, it'll say something like, this does not obligate, there's the key word there, this does not obligate the government to a purchase order and or contract. What that means is it's just it's a free out for them to say, okay, great, we get the quotes, but if the budget changes, we don't have to buy if we don't want to. You could quote all day long. We're not paying for information like we talked about in the first 5 or 6, but this does not obligate the government to a purchase order and or contract. Okay, honorable mention that I like is, I'll put it up at the top here, is agency. This is really number 11. What I like to do is I like to look at the agency that's buying, whether it's the VA, the DOD, Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security. They're busy. You know, if it's the post office, that's a department that's not doing too well, obviously, as we know. If it's another one like, you got to pick one. You know, like DOD has a budget. Social Security Administration has a budget. People choose what agency they want to target. It also depends on your product. You know, I've got a client that's in all different types of lotions and soaps and beauty supplies. They want to target the Federal Bureau of Prisons. That's who they want to target. So it's also, when we talk about agency, it's also about targeting. All right, we're pretty much done here. I'll open the floor, Chris and Marina, and we had one more person. We had a couple other people in here. Any questions?
Yes, so I have a question.
Okay.
Who qualifies to submit these bids? If, for example, the company is a U.S. company, but the owner of the company is not a U.S. citizen, are they still qualified? Do they still qualify?
Great question. Okay, so the question was, if the owner is not a U.S. citizen, but the company has a cage code. Is that what I'm hearing? Right. So if the
It's a corporation in U.S. It's
yes.
a corporation in US.
So as long as, here's the thing, as long as you have a CAGE, a cage code, and you also get what's called a UEI number, that's a unique employer ID number, unique employer ID number, okay? The government's going by the company, not the CEO or CFO or sales manager or whoever. The government is saying, hey, you're registered, you have a cage code, you have a UEI number, we're good to go. So you can bid and you can win. So yes, the government's going by the company.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions? Any follow?
No, I'm good.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sounding good, Mike. Thank you.
I have another question.
Okay, no problem.
If the company is designated with a specific code, but it's capable of delivering a different type of service, are they able to create multiple codes, or they can apply with one code but submit a bid with another code? How does that work?
Great question. So the company's registered. We're going to call it XYZ company. They're registered. They've got a cage code. They've got a UEI number. They've got the NICS codes, the North American Industry Code standards, and usually it's about 4 to 6 of them, ballpark. Okay. Now, this company goes out on sam.gov and says, hey, we really like this bid over here, but it's not part of our portfolio, but we can do it. The answer is yes, you can bid, and then what will happen is the contract manager will look you up on sam.gov and look at your registration, your NICS code, and say, can you please add this NICS code to your registration? You could do it ahead of time also. So yes, you could, yeah. You could add your NICS, you can modify those. You can modify your registration in terms of the sectors that you're in. So you don't want to do it too much. What's that?
Another question.
Sure.
You see that I'm not local in US.
Fair enough.
So if the company is corporation in US, in order to bid for these contracts, do you have to have workforce in US to deliver the service, or we can send people from Canada, for example, to deliver the service, and it's not a prerequisite?
Okay, so the question was, you're registered as the company, but can you send the labor?
Do I have to have local employees in US or live in US, or I can have outsource from Canada?
Right. The answer is yes, and but it depends. So the question was, and I'm just trying to speak to my recording, can you send, foreign nationals to do the work? The answer is most likely yes, and I say most likely very loosely, is that the government will say in the bid, tell us who you're sending, and they've got to be, we're going to take a look at them. For example, let me give you an example. We had a client that is in surveillance cameras and that has installation. Maybe this isn't, but they looked at they did a background check on all the subcontractors that were working on this surveillance camera installation. There's hundreds of surveillance cameras and wires and all that. They did a background check. So the government will do, if you're going onto a VA hospital property, trust me, they're going to do a background check. The answer is yes, you can have folks, for example, like I said at the beginning of the master class, I'm looking at social media, and I've been talking to folks in India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. That just turned out that way. So they can do the work. The thing for the government, to answer your question, is the disclosure has to be there. You have to let them know, hey, this person is in Winnipeg. I think that's where you're at, right? Winnipeg, Manitoba, or is it Alberta? I forget.
Winnipeg, you're good.
Okay. All right.
Winnipeg, yes.
Yeah. Anyway, again, it's the disclosure, and the government's going to ask for, the government might say, look, you're applying as the prime contractor. Who are your subcontractors? And they'll ask for that. So, and that'll be okay,
Awesome.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Any other questions? All right, good. Let me pause this right here.